Story 1. Haunted Beach. A true horror story. Introduction. The Dare. Blackwood Beach was a legend whispered across campfires and locked dormitory doors, a place notorious for its cursed sands and the eerie history of the sailors who vanished there decades ago. Stories of eerie whispers and ghostly apparitions had earned it the nickname, the Beach of the Drowned. For Mia, Ethan, Claire, Jacob, and Lily, it wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. The friends had always sought thrills in the unexplained, urban legends, and haunted locales. When Mia found a leather-bound journal in her grandmother's attic describing Blackwood Beach and its horrors, she couldn't resist. "This is our next adventure," she had declared, showing the group the journal. "What's the worst that could happen? It's just stories." The journal described a 1923 shipwreck, a violent storm that tore a merchant ship to shreds near the cliffs of Blackwood Beach. Survivors who swam to safety never returned. According to local lore, their spirits were cursed, bound to the beach for eternity. Ethan, the group's skeptic, scoffed. "Ghosts? Curses? Come on, Mia. It's just folklore. Let's prove this beach is just another overblown legend." The others hesitated, but the pull of adventure and a sense of invincibility that comes with youth was too strong to resist. Chapter 1. Journey to the Beach. The group set off in 2 cars, heading to the remote coastal town near Blackwood Beach. The drive was long, the road winding through dense forests and narrow mountain passes. As they neared the coast, the weather began to shift. Clouds thickened, and an oppressive fog crept across the horizon. They arrived at a small, deserted parking lot overlooking the ocean. A rugged trail led down to the beach. A wooden sign, half rotted and weathered, stood at the entrance. It read, "Warning, do not enter unsafe conditions." "That's inviting," Jacob joked, snapping a photo of the sign. The trail was treacherous, overgrown with thorns and slick with mud from recent rains. As they descended, the sound of waves crashing grew louder, almost deafening, as though the ocean itself resented their presence. Finally, they emerged onto the sand. Blackwood Beach stretched before them, framed by jagged cliffs and a restless sea. The sand was an unusual shade of gold, glittering faintly in the fading sunlight. "Beautiful, right?" Claire said, trying to ignore the unease creeping up her spine. The group set up camp near a cluster of driftwood. Jacob built a fire while Lily arranged their supplies. Ethan wandered off to explore the shoreline, his flashlight cutting through the fog. Chapter 2. Unearthly Whispers. As night fell, the beach transformed. The firelight cast long, flickering shadows, and the air grew colder. The friends gathered around the fire, laughing and telling stories to dispel the growing unease. Mia opened the journal and began reading aloud. Her voice trembled as she recounted the shipwreck. "They sought refuge on the sands," she read, "but the beach offered no salvation. Instead, it became their tomb, their souls bound by the rage of the sea. A gust of wind extinguished the fire. In the darkness, the group heard it. Faint whispers carried on the breeze, too soft to understand but unmistakably human. "Did you hear that?" Lily whispered, clutching her jacket. "Probably just the wind," Ethan said, though his voice wavered. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like voices crying out, overlapping in a mournful chorus. Chapter 3. The First Encounter. Lily, unable to shake her unease, wandered toward the shoreline. The moonlight illuminated the waves and something glinted in the sand. It was a rusted compass, half buried. As she picked it up, a chilling sensation swept over her. The whispers grew louder, and she heard a faint cry. "Help us!" Dropping the compass, she stumbled back to the group, trembling. "What's wrong?" Mia asked. "There's something out there," Lily stammered, pointing toward the ocean. Before anyone could respond, Ethan called out from the cliffs. He had wandered farther than intended, drawn by a strange light. Guys, come look at this. Reluctantly, the group followed. Ethan was standing near a weathered wooden chest, its lid ajar. Inside were old, waterlogged papers and trinkets, remnants of the shipwreck. "Don't touch it," Mia warned. But Ethan ignored her, pulling out a tarnished pocket watch. As soon as he touched it, the whispers turned into anguished screams. The ground trembled, and the air grew thick with an unexplainable pressure. A shadowy figure appeared at the water's edge. It was a man, drenched and hollow-eyed, his expression twisted in agony. "Run!" he rasped, before collapsing into the sand and vanishing. Chapter 4. The Curse Awakens. The group sprinted back to the campfire, panic setting in. "We need to leave," Claire said, her voice shaking. But as they packed their things, the beach began to change. The sand shifted beneath their feet, and the ocean seemed to rise unnaturally high. Dark shapes moved in the waves, too large to be fish. "Look!" Jacob shouted, pointing to the cliffs. Silhouetted against the moonlight were figures, dozens of them, standing motionless. They were sailors, their clothes tattered, their faces obscured by shadow. The group froze, paralyzed by fear. Then, one by one, the figures began descending toward them. Chapter 5. Descent into chaos. Jacob was the first to fall. As the figures approached, skeletal hands emerged from the sand, grabbing his ankles. He screamed as he was dragged toward the water, his nails clawing at the ground. The others tried to pull him free, but the hands were too strong. Jacob disappeared beneath the waves, his screams cut short. "We have to go!" Ethan yelled, but the fog had grown thicker, trapping them. Every path they took led them back to the beach. In desperation, Mia turned to the journal, searching for answers. She found a page detailing a ritual to appease the spirits, but it required a sacrifice. "No," Claire said firmly. "We can't. We don't have a choice," Mia snapped. Chapter 6. The Sacrifice. The group argued, their fear turning to desperation. As they debated, Lily was taken, dragged into the ocean by an unseen force. Her screams echoed as the waves swallowed her whole. "Who's next?" Ethan muttered, his bravado gone. Mia decided to perform the ritual, hoping it would save them. She drew a circle in the sand and lit a fire at its center, chanting the incantation from the journal. The spirits appeared, their faces contorted in fury. The ground shook and the ocean roared. "It's not working," Ethan shouted. The spirits demanded more than words. They needed blood. Chapter 7. The Final Hours. In a moment of blind panic, Claire pushed Mia into the circle. The spirits descended on her, their screams mingling with hers as she was torn apart. The beach fell silent. The fog lifted, and the spirits vanished. Claire and Ethan stumbled back to the trail, shaken but alive. "Never again," Ethan said, his voice hollow. But as they reached the parking lot, they realized the curse wasn't over. The car keys were missing, their phones were dead, and the whispers had returned. Epilogue. The beach takes all months. Later, Claire returned to Blackwood Beach. The guilt of sacrificing Mia had consumed her. She walked into the ocean, surrendering herself to the curse. Blackwood Beach remains untouched, its sands hiding the secrets of those who dared to disturb it. Moral: respect the unknown. Some places are cursed for a reason, and curiosity can lead to unimaginable consequences. Story 2. The Mysterious Bar. A True Horror Story. Introduction. Michael Winters, a disillusioned novelist, was nearing the brink of despair. Once heralded as a literary genius, his early works captivated audiences worldwide, but that was over a decade ago. Now his creativity had dried up, leaving him adrift in a sea of mediocrity and failed projects. This was supposed to be his comeback. He had rented a secluded cabin in the countryside, hoping to reconnect with his muse. Instead, He found himself staring at blank pages, his mind an empty void. One night, frustration drove him out into the cold. He wandered aimlessly through the winding streets of a nearby town, a place that seemed trapped in time. The cobblestone roads glistened under a light drizzle, and the buildings loomed like silent sentinels. That's when he saw it. A bar tucked between two dilapidated buildings, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Open. Michael hesitated. The place wasn't listed on any maps he'd seen, and something about it felt off. But curiosity and a yearning for distraction won out. He pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. Chapter 1. The First Glance. The interior was dimly lit, its atmosphere thick with cigarette smoke and an unsettling silence. The room smelled of aged wood, stale beer, and something faintly metallic. Michael's eyes scanned the patrons. A gaunt man sat hunched over a drink, his face obscured by the brim of a tattered hat. At a corner table, a woman in a red dress swirled a glass of wine, her gaze distant and haunted. A shadowy figure in the back appeared to be talking to someone, or something that wasn't there. At the center of it all stood the bartender, a tall man with sharp features and piercing gray eyes that seemed to see straight through Michael. "Welcome," the bartender said, his voice smooth and cold. "What's your poison?" "Whiskey," Michael replied, taking a seat at the counter. The bartender smirked. "We have special options, if you're interested." Michael shrugged. "Why not?" The bartender produced a glass filled with a liquid that shimmered like molten silver. "First drinks on the house," he said, sliding it across the counter. Michael hesitated, then took a sip. The world around him shifted violently. Chapter 2. Regret Michael was no longer in the bar. He was in his childhood home, standing in the cramped living room where he'd spent countless hours with his father. But this wasn't a happy memory. He watched as his younger self, a brash, angry teenager, argued with his father. The scene was painfully familiar, his father pleading for understanding, Michael lashing out with cruel words. "I don't need you," his younger self shouted. "You're a failure, and I'm not going to end up like you." Michael tried to intervene, to stop himself from saying those words, but he was powerless, a ghost in his own past. The scene froze, and the bartender's voice echoed in the void. "Do you remember what happened next?" Michael did. His father walked out that night and never came back. The memory had haunted him for years, but seeing it play out again was unbearable. With a jolt, Michael was back in the bar, gasping for breath. The bartender chuckled. "Regret has a bitter taste, doesn't it?" Chapter 3. Fear. Michael should have left then and there, but something compelled him to stay. The bartender poured another drink, this one a deep, inky black. "Ready for another round?" he asked, his smile unnervingly wide. Michael nodded, and the moment the liquid touched his lips, the world dissolved once more. He found himself in a dark forest, the air heavy with an unnatural fog. The trees twisted and contorted, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. A low growl rumbled behind him. Michael turned to see glowing eyes staring back at him from the shadows. Creatures, inhuman, twisted beings, emerged, their forms shifting and writhing as though they couldn't hold a single shape. He ran, branches clawing at his skin as the creatures closed in. The forest seemed endless, and every path he took looped back to where he started. One of the creatures lunged, its claws grazing his arm. Pain shot through him, hot and real. Just as the pack descended upon him, Michael was yanked back to the bar, his arm still bleeding. The bartender smirked. "Fear leaves its mark, doesn't it?" Chapter 4. Truth. By now, Michael was desperate for answers. "What is this place?" he demanded. The bartender's expression darkened. "A mirror," he said. "A place where lost souls come to see themselves for what they truly are." Michael shook his head. "I didn't ask for this." "Didn't you?" the bartender countered. "You came here seeking inspiration, didn't you? A story worth telling? Drink up and you'll find your truth." Michael hesitated but took the glass offered to him. The liquid was clear but felt heavy in his hand. This time, the void was infinite. Michael saw himself, his true self, reflected in countless shards of glass. Each shard showed a different version of him. The selfish lover, the neglectful friend, the bitter failure. The voices of those he had hurt echoed around him. "You only care about yourself. You never listen. You took everything from me." Michael fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his actions. The bartender appeared beside him, his eyes cold and unyielding. "This is who you are, Michael. The question is, what will you do with it?" Chapter 5. The Return. Michael woke up on a park bench, clutching a leather-bound journal he didn't remember owning. Inside, he found pages upon pages of frantic scribbles, notes, sketches, and fragments of a story he didn't recall writing. The bar was gone, and the town seemed normal, almost dull in the daylight. Michael returned to his cabin and threw himself into writing. The story poured out of him, raw and unfiltered. It was his masterpiece, a tale of horror and redemption, inspired by his own harrowing experience. The book, titled The Mysterious Bar, became an instant sensation. Critics hailed it as a work of genius, and Michael was thrust back into the spotlight. But success came with a price. Chapter 6. The Curse fans began reporting strange phenomena while reading Michael's book. Some claimed to see shadowy figures in the corners of their vision. Others heard whispers that grew louder with each page. A few disappeared entirely. Michael's dreams were haunted by the bartender's grin and the glowing neon sign of the bar. No matter where he went, he felt its pull, as if it was waiting for him to return. One night, unable to bear the guilt and fear any longer, Michael packed his things and set off to find the bar. He wandered for days, retracing his steps, but it was as if the bar had never existed. Or perhaps it was waiting for the right moment to reappear. Moral. The story warns of the dangers of seeking truth without preparation, and the cost of exploiting one's pain for success. Facing our inner demons is essential, but some truths are best left undiscovered. Story 3. The Haunted Hotel. A True Horror Story. Introduction. On the edge of Ravenshade Forest, where trees gnarled into skeletal shapes and fog clung to the ground like a living entity, stood the Ravenshade Hotel. Built in 1892 by the eccentric millionaire Elias Grayson, it was once a marvel of luxury and opulence. Guests from all over the world had dined in its grand halls and danced in its gilded ballrooms. But in 1934, tragedy struck. A mysterious fire consumed part of the hotel, and Elias Grayson disappeared without a trace. Stories soon emerged of guests vanishing in the middle of the night, their belongings left untouched. Rumors swirled about Grayson dabbling in the occult, using the hotel as a site for dark rituals to achieve immortality. The hotel was abandoned, left to decay and rot. Over the years, it became the subject of local legends. Teenagers dared each other to step inside, and ghost hunters swore it was haunted. Despite the warnings, 4 thrill-seeking friends decided to uncover the truth. For them, it was supposed to be just another adventure. Instead, it became a fight for their very souls. Part 1. The Arrival. Emma, Mike, Rachel, and Alex pulled up to the hotel just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The car's headlights illuminated the massive structure, its windows shattered and ivy choking its once pristine walls. "This is insane," Alex said, grabbing his camera. Do you know how many views this is going to get? Rachel rolled her eyes. Because risking our lives for likes is such a smart idea. Emma, the group's history enthusiast, stared up at the building. This place has a dark past. Elias Grayson was obsessed with immortality. They say he performed rituals to trap souls in the hotel, binding them here forever. Mike laughed, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Sounds like a load of crap. Let's just get inside, take some photos, and call it a night. The group pushed open the massive oak doors, which creaked loudly as they entered the lobby. Dust motes danced in the faint light of their flashlights. Once a masterpiece of design, the lobby was now a decayed ruin. A massive chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, and furniture lay overturned and broken. Looks like something out of a horror movie, Rachel muttered, shivering as a cold draft swept through the room. The group ventured deeper, their footsteps echoing ominously. Emma found an old newspaper clipping pinned to a rotting notice board. The headline read, "Fire at Ravenshade Hotel. Owner missing. Guests perish in mystery blaze." The fire killed 12 people, Emma explained. But Elias Grayson was never found. Some say he escaped. Others say... She trailed off, glancing uneasily at the shadows. Part 2. The first encounter. The first few hours passed uneventfully as they explored the upper floors. They found grand ballrooms filled with cobwebs, guest rooms with peeling wallpaper, and a library stacked with decaying books. "This place is creepy," Rachel said, brushing off cobwebs as she trailed behind the group. In the dining hall, they noticed a single chair sliding slowly across the floor. Everyone froze. "It's just the wind," Mike said, though his voice wavered. "But there's no wind," Rachel pointed out, glancing at the boarded-up windows. In a corridor lined with cracked mirrors, Mike stopped to inspect his reflection. He wiped the grime from one mirror and stared at his face. For a moment, his reflection didn't move. Instead, it tilted its head and smiled, a wide, unnatural grin. Mike stumbled back, his flashlight shaking. When he looked again, the reflection was normal. "Everything okay?" Alex asked, noticing Mike's pale expression. "Yeah," Mike muttered. "I'm fine." Part 3. The basement door. Eventually, the group discovered a staircase leading to the basement. The air grew colder as they descended, their flashlights revealing damp stone walls. At the bottom, they found a locked wooden door with strange symbols carved into it. Scratched below the symbols were the words, "Do not disturb the dead." Alex grinned, pulling a crowbar from his bag. "I'm not leaving without seeing what's behind this." "Maybe we shouldn't," Emma said, uneasily eyeing the symbols. But Alex ignored her and pried the door open. Inside was a hidden room filled with melted candles, strange symbols painted on the walls, and an altar covered in dried blood. "This is some serious occult stuff," Rachel whispered, taking a step back. Emma picked up an old leather-bound journal from the altar. She flipped through its pages, her face growing paler with each word. "This is Elias Grayson's journal. He was trying to bind souls to the hotel, to himself." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. The room grew unbearably cold, and a low whisper filled the air. "Let's get out of here," Emma said, clutching the journal tightly. Part 4. The unraveling. That night, the hotel's true nature revealed itself. Doors slammed shut on their own, ghostly laughter echoed through the halls, and shadows seemed to move independently of the light. Rachel was the first to panic. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of her name being whispered. Following the voice, she found herself in a hallway that stretched endlessly in both directions. A woman's sobbing came from one of the doors. When Rachel opened it, the room was empty except for a rocking chair that moved back and forth. Meanwhile, Mike became fixated on the mirrors. No matter where he went, he saw the same gaunt figure staring back at him. "It's just my imagination," he told himself. but deep down, he knew it wasn't. Emma spent the night reading Grayson's journal. The more she read, the more she realized the hotel wasn't just haunted, it was alive. "He didn't just bind the souls of others," she told Alex. "He bound himself to this place. He is the hotel." Part 5. The Hotel's Hunger. By midnight, the hotel began to warp. Hallways twisted into mazes, doors led to nowhere, and the walls seemed to pulse like a beating heart. In the grand ballroom, Emma encountered ghostly figures waltzing to music that grew louder and more discordant. As she backed away, the figures turned to her, their eyeless faces twisted into malicious grins. Mike was cornered in the library by Elias Grayson himself. The apparition loomed over him, whispering promises of power in exchange for his soul. When Mike refused, the figure lashed out, and Mike's screams echoed through the halls. Rachel and Alex tried to find an exit, but every door they opened led them deeper into the building. At one point, Alex's camera began recording on its own, capturing ghostly apparitions surrounding them. Part 6. The Revelation. The remaining group members regrouped in the basement, drawn there by an invisible force. They found an altar surrounded by skeletons, victims of Grayson's rituals. "This is where it all started," Emma said, clutching the journal. "We have to destroy it." Before they could act, Mike appeared. His skin was pale, and his eyes were black pits. "Stay," he whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. "It's easier this way." Emma screamed as Mike lunged at them, his strength inhuman. Alex fought him off, but they knew they were outmatched. Part 7. The Final Stand. Desperate, Emma and Rachel set fire to the altar. As the flames consumed it, the hotel began to scream. The walls shook, and the spirits of the trapped souls began to disintegrate, their tortured moans filling the air. The group barely escaped as the hotel collapsed into a fiery inferno. Outside, they watched in silence as the cursed building was finally destroyed. Epilogue. Emma, Rachel, and Alex survived, but they were forever haunted by the events of that night. They had broken the curse, but at a terrible cost. The memory of their friend Mike, consumed by the hotel, would never leave them. Moral curiosity is a powerful force, but some mysteries are best left unsolved. The story of the Ravenshade Hotel serves as a chilling reminder to respect the unknown and heed the warnings of the past.